Hello, I'm Captain Jack and welcome to the Hangar Bay. On this channel, we take a deep dive into the best starships, technology, and more from your favourite sci-fi universes. When I say the first Enterprise, you might be thinking of Star Trek's NCC-1701 from the original series, commonly known as Kirk's Enterprise. Well, the NX01 is the first Enterprise starship for Starfleet. In today's breakdown, we'll look at the NX01 Enterprise, famously seen in the short-lived and much missed series of Star Trek Enterprise. Remember to hit the subscribe button for the latest videos. Let us know what you think of this ship in the comments below, and what starship or technology should we focus on next? The NX-class ships were designated as an explorer-type vessel and were 225 meters long. Enterprise itself was crewed with 83 crew as standard, later joined by a contingent of Mako personnel and of course Archer's prize Beagle, Porthos. Coming in at 7 decks, designated by letters A through G, which is far more accurate than the vague numbering system that came in use on future starships. There were also 2 half-decks located between D and E. The ship looked like what would become a standard design for Starfleet ships: a saucer section, somewhat of a secondary hull, and 2 warp nacelles. The ship somewhat had an Akira-class look from the 24th century, with the designers of the Akira perhaps looking back on old designs for inspiration. Defenses installed on the initial design were including 3-phase cannons, plasma cannons, 4 forward-facing ventral torpedo launchers armed with spatial torpedoes, and polarized hull plating, no shields. Unlike later ships, the NX01 needed regular maintenance from the outside and carried at least 1 inspection pod to carry repairs from the outside. It is housed within a small bay in the ventral saucer section. The Enterprise was the first Starfleet ship to have a transporter system, but due to its recent technological advancement, many of the crew were skeptical and used the shuttles. This required them to go through decontamination chambers in case they brought something back. This caused a few awkward moments in the series of Star Trek Enterprise. If you know, you know. 2 shuttle pods were aboard the ship as essential auxiliary vessels before the transporter became a primary use of ship-to-surface transport. These pods were housed within the launch bays, capable of space and atmospheric flight, and had a capacity to carry up to 7 people, including the pilot. Its maximum speed, 1/4 impulse. The shuttles were armed with plasma cannons and spatial charges, and defended with polarized hull plating. They had 3 points of entry, a hatch on either side, and an airlock on the dorsal hull, which could extend and create a seal around a port on a vessel. Also located within the launch bay is the grappler, which is lowered from one of the bays to target and fire from the extended arm. In 2152, the NX01 had a quantum beacon device installed on the grapple arm for some time to help detect cloaked starships. The interior of the ship was very submarine-like, with some low ceilings in certain rooms, such as the ready room of the captain. Due to this being an early ship, there were no Jeffries tubes, so the space between decks was hard to maneuver and not intended for constant use. The ship would have some usual rooms needed for running the ship, with a bridge, medbay, engineering, and so on. However, some interesting elements of the ship include its armory and even a command center, specifically installed for a mission into the Delphic Expanse, which allowed for more of a dedicated data analysis and mission control. The ship had a mess hall which came with a simple protein resequencer, as replicators had not been made by the United Earth at this point. They could make potatoes, sandwiches, meatloaf, and such, including at least 5 flavors of ice cream. However, there was a chef on board that would cook up a variety of meals using foods fresh as fresh can be, from cryogenic storage for the crew galley. The Warp 5 project was a dream of many within Starfleet and the United Earth Space Probe Agency of the United Earth, to finally become independent of their Vulcan overseers and make a vessel to explore the stars as humans strive to do. The main scientists of this project were Zefram Cochrane, before he disappeared to find love with an alien cloud-like entity. Sounds like Star Trek. Cochrane was assisted by Henry Archer, father of the one who would later become captain of the first Warp 5 vessel, Jonathan Archer. The project was difficult, with no help from the Vulcans. Henry Archer's death and Cochrane's disappearance. The program was nearly shut down until the NX project, using Henry Archer's Warp 5 engine, proved a success, with the NX01 being commissioned shortly thereafter. The NX01, or Enterprise, was launched 3 weeks ahead of its intended date. It wasn't able to hit maximum warp right out of space dock, as it hadn't yet been tested to reach its maximum potential. Therefore, they had to do that on the job over the course of their voyages. Seeing as Captain Archer was eager to prove to the Vulcans that they were more than up to the task of taking an injured Klingon named Klang back to Kronos, he hastily assembled his remaining senior staff. This included Dr. Phlox, being one of the people responsible for nursing Klang back to good health. As such, Enterprise wasn't complete, only armed with simple plasma cannons but stocked with torpedoes for the launchers. As we're all well aware, torpedoes have minimal effect on shielding. The NX01 Enterprise would have numerous first contact encounters throughout its travels. As the first long-range exploration vessel for Starfleet, it would make first contact with numerous species, such as the Andorians, Klingons, Orions, Folians, and many, many more. As an outside third party to the galactic stage at this time, the Enterprise was well situated to help resolve issues, such as talks between the Vulcans and Andorians and Tellarites, and more. Though exploring and talking weren't the only things this new Starfleet ship did, as it got into fights just as frequently, being damaged a lot of the time, but learning from each engagement and gaining new technology and knowledge. With this knowledge from Enterprise's many engagements, Captain Archer suggests enhancements to the NX-02 Columbia, the successor Starship, to include dorsal torpedo launches in conjunction with standard ventral, which by 2154 were armed with photonic warheads, mirroring the advancements achieved by its predecessor. Some of the NX Enterprise's major roles during this time was its involvement in the Temporal Cold War, where it essentially became a battleground between factions due to the historical significance of its mission and purpose, which was to create the Federation eventually. This involved conspiracies, battles, and discoveries, from pseudobomb plots, Folian interference, and Nazi time-traveling aliens. Yes, this ship saw it all. However, one of the arguably most significant impacts the Enterprise had was during its hunt for the Xindi weapon, with a faction known as the Spear Builders triggering a faction known as the Xindi into destroying Earth to ensure the United Federation of Planets doesn't come about. Thankfully, they didn't succeed. The Enterprise would find the Xindi and stop them, stopping the plans of the Spear Builders from reforming space into their configurations so they could invade the galaxy by the 26th century. This would culminate in the Battle of Procyon V between the Federation and the Spear Builders in a possible future. The Enterprise would deal with the Romulan interference in the quadrant, with the Romulans covertly changing the Vulcan government and attacking species with a drone ship that could change its appearance, so everyone would think that enemies attacked them. This plan would backfire and lead to a stronger alliance between the factions of the Alpha Quadrant, eventually leading to the Earth-Romulan War. One of the final threats we know that the NX dealt with was not from the outside, but inside, with xenophobic groups on Earth gaining traction from attacks such as the Xindi weapon on their planet, and would almost destroy Starfleet if not for the efforts of the crew of the NX-01 Enterprise. Initially, the well-known Star Trek concept artist, John Eves, drew up designs of the NX class. While all loved his designs, they were too close to Matt Jefferies' design for Kirk's original Enterprise. He produced dozens of drawings, but no one could settle on the best approach for the new ship. Production designer Herman Zimmerman turned to former member of his team, Doug Drexler, a veteran of Star Trek by the time of Star Trek Enterprise. Drexler had worked on production since the 1970s, but had since moved on to visual effects, so instead he came up with some 3D models and also revisited Jefferies' original rejected design, and made the ship spherical. But no one was willing to lose the familiar saucer, for it to be instantly recognisable as a Star Trek ship. The Spear would later become an iconic feature on the Daedalus and Olympic classes. Of course, the NX took inspiration from a real-world space program. The man, the myth, the legend, scenic artist Mike Okuda chipped in with designs for the airlocks, which were closely modelled after the International Space Station. Drexler figured that it would be maintenance intensive and would take a hardy breed of engineers to run the ship. Some maintenance would be required to be done on the outside, a refinement that would come later on Kirk's ship that suggests it is all doable from the inside. Drexler recalls the process as painful and hair-raising, but there isn't frivolous lines on it. Every bit of it has a purpose and is thought out, making the NX-01 more practical. Doug Drexler deliberately attempted to insert references to the original series USS Enterprise, such as the nacelle struts, which would have been a third longer, orange buzzard collectors, which after being overhauled by Rick Berman wound up being red, like the TNG era ships. Elements of the original that made it into the finished design were the impulse drives at the rear of the saucer and the sensor dome on the underside. Alex Yeager's design of the Akira class starship provided some early inspiration and influenced the design direction of the NX-01, although significant changes were made so that the ship would have more in common with the original series. The class ended up being designated NX by the producers, despite Drexler referring it to as an Enterprise class, keeping with the naval tradition of naming the class after the first vessel, which is commonplace within the Star Trek universe. Only CGI models were made for the ship, a high-res version used for the television shots and a low-res for promotional shots for magazines, which had minor differences such as smaller windows. The idea was to be that the ship would look very differently by the end of the series, from when it began, this being that it constantly got refitted with newer and upgraded technology. Whilst the ship had received internal upgrades, nothing was substantially changed, but it stopped the VFX team reusing shots already made. Had the Star Trek Enterprise series been renewed for Season 5, that would have changed. Doug Drexler had intended for the NX01 Enterprise to undergo a major refit. The intention was for the warp field regulator section to just slide out, and a new engineering hull would slot in its place, leaving the original part of the NX01 sitting on top of a new section of ship. Warp nacelles were to be replaced by ones that covered warp field grills, to probably more closely resemble the beloved original Constitution Enterprise. Of course, the most important addition would be the secondary hull that would be reintroduced or introduced. In this case, the traditional situated deflector dish to complement the one installed on the nose of a saucer. I'm curious at why they didn't just remove it and close up the gap, but perhaps it would have been a secondary backup if a primary was damaged or otherwise offline. In universe, it's possible to inspire the standard dual-feature long-range science-type vessels such as the USS Voyager, which would make sense as they're most likely to enter more hazardous anomalies and nebula, so having an auxiliary deflector array as a backup or active in conjunction with a main dish would be beneficial. The NX refit is a really amazing design and helps show how the NX-01 eventually became the USS Enterprise that introduced us to Star Trek all the way back in the original series. Drexler did produce drawings from Pierre Drolet, who built the original NX01, and created a fully realised CG version, which he and Drexler dubbed NX1.5. The interiors were designed by Hans Zimmerman, who visited United States Navy fast-attack submarines for inspiration to mimic interiors, whilst giving the sets greater freedom of angles than any other series. Engineering was changed from the usual vertical warp core with the intention of imitating a nuclear submarine's engine room with the horizontal warp reactor. The sets did have what was referred to as busy boxes, which were fold-out panels with wiring in, for background actors to appear busy during refits or repairs when battle damage was to be seen on screen. The situation table was built at the rear of the bridge, much like the Defiant class had on its bridge, as the producer stated that it was challenging to have people sitting around a table appearing attractive. It's not like we've seen that too many times before, right? So what do you think of the NX01 Enterprise? Would you be taking an NX class into battle with you, or do you fancy something like another Enterprise? Catch a video on what might be the worst Enterprise via the link on screen now. That's the end of this video. I've been Captain Jack in the Hangar Bay. Remember, if you're talking about science fiction, then we want to hear about it. See you next time.